for this session. You don't have to look at me and Mateo and the screen. And I'm not sure where to look. The screens all over the place, but I leave it to you to choose the one that's clearest. So, what we wanted to do now is to talk a little bit more about the type of measure. Rather than jumping into the principles, which will come, let's clarify a little bit what exactly we are talking about in terms of the measure at issue. Remember that we said that at the very beginning that tariff levels have gone down over time. We asked the Statistics Division shortly before coming here if they could plot out in a graph the level of the tariffs since '95 and their development until last year, I think 2021 or 2 years ago. And there you have apply and MFN rates. So those, and you can see there that tariff levels have gone down by about half, from slightly around 6% to close to 2.5%, 3%. So it was just to make this point that tariffs today on most products traded in the world are quite low. Those are the orange and blue lines. The blue line is the actual applied tariff, while the orange line is the MFN duty rate above which they cannot go higher because of commitments at WTO. So the gray pillars, those are the notifications of TBT measures. So technical barriers to trade measures, and you see how they have increased. So it's a bit to show this contrast. So technical barriers to trade measures, the notifications have increased. The yellow ones, those are the specific trade concerns. And it looks very small because of the proportion in terms of notifications, but actually they're in the hundreds too. And there you also see the yellow becoming more prominent with the years. So the only message we wanted to give with this graph was that yes, tariffs have gone down over time. And you see a tendency where countries are notifying more and more technical regulations and specific trade concerns. Mateo, you jump in whenever something to add. So, do we talk about non-tariff barriers or non-tariff measures? So what's the difference? I'm not going to let you off the hook from speaking entirely. I'm not here to speak all the time. Is there a difference between the two, or non-tariff barriers, non-tariff measures?
Somebody else say.
Perfect.
Non-tariff measures include SPS. Non-tariff measures include SPS, special solution.
Absolutely, and maybe they cover even a broader set of measures, right? So Erik was just mentioning a graph with tariffs. Tariffs, we know what tariffs are. And now what would be the other big category? So some people refer to that other big category as non-tariff barriers, but some other people refer to that as non-tariff measures. And maybe before we delve into the specific subcategories, I guess there is that interesting point. Should we be talking about barriers or should we be talking about measures?
Yeah, so for me, these two are used interchangeably. People talk about non-tariff barriers, non-tariff measures. For me, the more correct term is a non-tariff measure, because that is more neutral. It doesn't give any kind of judgment on whether it is legitimate or not, or whether you have the right to use it or not. Often people talk about non-tariff barriers, they can also be completely legitimate. That's why I say they're interchangeable. But sometimes, and even in the WTO, there's this perception that non-tariff barriers are not allowed. But they are. As we saw this morning, in some cases, governments may regulate in a way that it causes a barrier to trade, and that is maybe justifiable on health grounds and environmental grounds. So don't think automatically, because it's called a non-tariff barrier, that it is in violation of either TBT or SPS. And to your comment, non-tariff measures covers everything, both TBT and SPS. Non-tariff barriers similarly. They are the majority of non-tariff measures covered by WTO rules or either TBT or SPS. But then there are other pre-shipment inspection, licensing, there are other agreements that are also covered. But the customs regulations, they're also covered as well. But if you look at the numbers, the vast majority of non-tariff measures that are of significance to trade today are either TBT or SPS. And they are referred to interchangeably as non-tariff measures or non-tariff barriers. I would promote the term non-tariff measures. It's more neutral.
I have a point.
Yeah, please.
One of the non-tariff measure rules of origin. There was an agreement in the WTO that non-preferential rules of origin. There was agreed. Then the scene would have completely changed. The notification becomes mandatory with all RTAs. There were preferential rules of origin, and then had been notified. Then the whole gamut would have changed. Also, when you are analyzing non-tariff measures, when you're analyzing non-tariff measures and non-tariff barriers, one is a WTO compatible measure, and another is a WTO non-tariff, which is non-tariff. So I think quotas, cannot be used. So somewhere, as you said, interchangeably used. That's a common phenomenon, and that is where all the confusion and the audience is also coming. So I feel that needs to be corrected at the top itself.
Yeah. I guess the point I was trying to make is that I don't think one should look at this, but it's a question of terminology, a question of a history and culture, how you use the terms. I'm not saying one is wrong or right, but one should not look at the concept of a non-tariff barrier as necessarily compatible with the agreements, because a lot of barriers may be justified. So you cannot say that WTO is about taking away all non-tariff barriers. The agreement itself is called technical barriers to trade. It doesn't mean you have to take away all barriers, to the contrary. So I would promote the non-use of the term non-tariff barriers because it causes confusion. I'm talking instead about non-tariff measures where it's more evident that it may be neutral in terms of applicability.
I think I agree with you, Erik, terminology of non-tariff measures, but it actually, it goes back far beyond in the way around, because even for tariffs, the WTO doesn't say that tariffs are necessary, but we always refer to them throughout the way around discussion as tariff barriers. So the point is that anything that is a barrier in the sense that it puts an obligation to the partner countries' participants to enter your market is interpreted as a barrier, whether it's a tariff or a non-tariff measure. Tariffs are also measures which are called barriers. The technical are also measures, but they're called. So to an extent, I think it's a hair splitting of sorts, but I agree with what you are saying, the neutrality, because as we discussed earlier, it's the legitimacy of whether or not they're required to regulate.
Yeah.
Just one additional thought on that, because there is the question of legitimacy, the question of whether the barrier, the measure is justified. But another reason why perhaps, as Erik indicates, it would be beneficial to use non-tariff measures more often is the fact that as well regulation can facilitate trade. And I think the pandemic was a very clear example of situations in which governments adopted a number of trade measures with the sole purpose of facilitating trade in essential medical goods and others. So that's maybe another point why maybe this notion of barrier could potentially be a bit outdated.
Yeah. So that was just a reflection on the term and the terminology. But so when you hear us talk about non-tariff measures, we are not passing judgment on its compatibility or incompatibility with WTO rules. We're talking about non-tariff measure. It may affect rules, it may be completely justifiable, it may facilitate trade. It's a measure that affects trade. So where does this come in? Where does this fit into the WTO framework of the agreement? And now I realize the next graph is hard to see, particularly because yesterday I lost my glasses on the plane, so I have the wrong computer glasses. So,
Absolutely. So if you go, yeah, this is a bit of a big chart, but if you see, so we have the highest decision-making body, the WTO, is the Ministerial Conference. That's right on top. They meet every 2 years. And right underneath, we have the General Council, which is the highest decision-making body on a daily basis in Geneva, normally led by ambassadors and permanent representatives. Now, under the General Council, there are a number of sub-councils that deal with the specific issues covered in the 3 main agreements that govern trading goods, trading services, and IP. Now, within trading goods, we have the Council for Trading Goods, and there are a number of committees underneath that deal with specific sub-issues and specific covered agreements. One of them is the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee, which is chaired by Anwar, and another one is the SPS Committee, which is in a way the sister committee.
Yeah, so that was just to situate where we talk about technical barriers to trade at the WTO. So where do these fit in the WTO cycle of work? So how do we fit in the work of the TBT committee in what we do at the WTO? So for me, the way we see this is that the WTO is essentially about rules. We don't have projects, we don't do major implementation schemes in countries. It's essentially a body which is about the negotiation of rules for trade, the implementation of those rules, and solving disputes. So those are the 3 pillars of the WTO work. And what we are looking at here is within the goods part, we're looking at the part which is technical barriers to trade. So the focus here is, we're not really looking at negotiations. There are no ongoing negotiations on the TBT agreement right now. There were, to some extent, under the NAMA discussions earlier on, the Doha round, there were proposals to renegotiate certain aspects of the TBT agreement, but that has fallen to the side now. There are a number of disputes. We will hear 1 or 2 examples from Mateo, I think, tomorrow under the TBT agreement. But our focus is in the implementation, where we have the work of the committee. And there also very closely fits in the work of the SPS committee, and to some extent the trade facilitation agreement. So these 3 agreements, I think, are the core of where one would look at regulatory and standards issues, whether we talk about SPS or TBT. That's where we are focusing on. So I find that the non-tariff measures, so again the M for measures, we're not going to call these barriers anymore. We often show this as a cloud. We were talking about a colleague over coffee, that we do it as a cloud because it's very difficult to quantify a technical regulation. It's much easier to say a tariff is 90% or 100% or for Norwegian cheese 600%. You can quantify the effect it will have on trade, but how do you quantify the effect of a regulation that says we will not allow imports of beef if the cattle in that country has foot and mouth disease? It's difficult to put that into numbers. So difficult to quantify is one part of the trouble with non-tariff measures. Another one is that there is often a problem with transparency. Again, 10% tariff is much easier to understand for industry than a regulation. And that's why notifications of draft regulations are quite important. And then the trade effects are ambiguous. What is the impact? How do you measure compliance? What is the conformity assessment used? How long time does it take before the measure goes into force? There is uncertainty involved. So all of this makes the area of non-tariff measures quite a bit more difficult to grapple with compared to tariffs. Are you all following? Yeah? Okay, so here we're talking about the SPS and TBT worlds. Of course, there are others. We mentioned that previously, licensing, rules of origin, etc. There are other areas. So what then exactly are we talking about on TBT? So what are the main issues? So we're talking about technical barriers to trade. And within the word measures, you can either be talking about mainly TBT measures or SPS measures. So on the TBT side, we talk about three different types of measures. Technical regulations, conformity assessment procedures, and standards. So if we look at that more closely, because SPS measures are not as clearly defined. SPS talks simply about any measure applied to and that has an effect. Only TBT has this distinction between technical regulation, conformity assessment, and standards. So someone asked about the definition of a standard. I have to move closer. So here we're talking about a recognized body, so any body, that provides for common and repeated use, rules, guidelines, etc., which sets out characteristics of products or their related process and production methods, and the key word with which compliance is not mandatory. So this is the definition set out in the TBT agreement. A technical regulation has more or less the same wording, but it refers to a document. So I think the choice of the word document was significant because it doesn't say a decree or an act or regulation, because in countries these are terms of very different. Just the matter that it was put down on paper, there is involvement of government there in making it mandatory. That is the technical regulation, so that is the key distinction between them. And conformity assessment can follow underneath. That is any procedure that is used to see whether the standard or the technical regulation is mandatory. Now the tricky thing is here is this distinction between mandatory and voluntary, where conformity assessment can be both, depending on whether you're looking at finding conformity with a standard or a regulation. And what many countries do is the focus of the discussion tends to be at the WTO on technical regulations, but the requirements and standards are often incorporated in a technical regulation, making it also a technical regulation. But this is the complex part, but we try to look at that a little bit more in detail before. I'll pause here because there may be questions or unclarity. Yeah,
There. Maybe the lady here and the colleague there.
So is it because standards are voluntary in nature? So that is why countries need not notify in the draft standards. Like, is this the implication?
I think the simple answer to that is yes. So standards are not seen to necessarily create such a trade impact because they are voluntary. A product could anyway enter the market if the standard is not complied with. While mandatory means that, well, if you don't comply with the standard, the requirements will not enter the market.
And so could you please give examples of both regulations and standards?
Shall we take the other question?
Yes.
While I think of examples.
I think there was the other question was here.
What does it constitute to become a recognized body? Is it within the jurisdiction of the respective nation, or does it draw from the WTO directly to be a recognized body?
Yeah, so very good question. I'll leave the recognized body difficult one to Mateo. And on standards and regulations, it was a little bit the comparison I made with Anwar's computer before, that a regulation will tend to be more directly about something where you have safety or direct human health consequences. So requirements that make sure that electrical appliances are not dangerous. And they will often refer to an international standard or one that you may want to use within your own country if you want to set a higher level of safety. But a standard can mean anything in terms of energy efficiency and design, etc. That is a much broader concept. or in the area of organics or sustainability, there are fair trade standards that are very, very important, where government does not regulate, but anyway sets requirements on the products when they are being marketed in the country.
So on the, maybe, one last observation with respect to this voluntary mandatory distinction. So when you look at that distinction here on the slide, it seems super straightforward, right? Standards are voluntary, technical regulations are mandatory. It seems as though there is really nothing much more than that. But as we will see tomorrow when we get into the jurisprudence, actually in a number of cases this can be quite a gray area and very tricky to determine whether the document you're looking at falls under one or the other. And in particular, we will be speaking about a very famous TBT dispute between Mexico and the US, which is called the US tuna dispute. And that question was central to that dispute. So we will get into that in more detail, just so that you see how in practice, particularly in the context of STCs and disputes, when you're looking at a specific measure, some of these concepts are rather difficult to apply. There's a question here, and we'll get back to your point in a moment.
I think you already have answered. So, what is the transformation method, and what is the requirement if you want to transform from standards to technical regulations?
So that's a very good question. So when we had once a thematic session on this in the TBT committee, I think a year ago. There are very many different methods used, but it's up to each member to decide how they will do it. Sometimes a regulation in a country will simply refer to a standard and say that for the purposes of achieving the objective of this regulation, members will use the requirements set out in that standard and future changes and revisions to the standard, because it may change with time. Sometimes the whole text of the standard is transposed into the regulation itself. That can also work, but I'm not particularly an expert on that, because it's the members that do this, so this is what I understand members do. One of the main questions they have is, should this link be dynamic or static? So static meaning you just say this standard in time is the one that we base the regulation on and it's printed. But that causes a problem if 5 years later the standard changes because of development in science and we have to redo the regulation. So in a way, the more indirect reference to a particular requirement in international standard or other standard might be the better one to use. On your question, should we go to that question?
Yeah, let's go to that question. Simply, as the lawyer between the two, I need to have this, so thank you so much, Primat and Rally, for bringing it. It's always useful to go to the agreement, to the very text of the agreement, especially when it comes to some of these very specific terms. So indeed, standards are understood as being approved by a recognized standardizing body. So that's the terminology there. And that's in Annex 1 of the TBT Agreement. Annex 1 contains a number of other definitions which are important, and those definitions should be used as building blocks in trying to go deeper into the nitty-gritty of the definitions of the three main types of measures. In particular, Annex 1, paragraph 1.9 of the Annex indicates that a standardizing body is a governmental or non-governmental body, one of whose recognized activities is in the field of standardization. So in the sense, simply to emphasize that this notion of being a recognized body is, of course, a recognized body in the field of standardization. But as you can tell, even from that language, as Erik has already been saying, the agreement itself is rather open. It doesn't prescribe it has to be the national standardizing body of a member. There could be many within a member. Some of them would be central, some of them would be local. So for those details, I would encourage you to take a look at Annex 1, which contains a very useful list of definitions.
I have a question on the slides. On the one there. Okay, say actually with respect to conformity assessment, which is the third pillar, should I say that countries which have technical regulation, larger number of technical regulation, will have an upper hand, and a combination of standards along with that would strengthen it, or how is it?
Yeah, there is no obvious answer to this because each country is regulated in a different way. So some countries regulate a lot, some do not. And for me, my personal view is that you can have very many standards, but one should be quite focused in terms of where the regulation is, in terms of what is it you want to regulate about. So as we will see after lunch, when we look at good regulatory practices, one of the first questions that has come up in the discussions of the committee is to always consider the need to regulate. And maybe you don't need to regulate. So regulation is not always the answer. But when you mention conformity assessment, I think you raise a tricky. Let me just mention this and leave the thought to fester with you. Because there's one scenario here that's not covered, and that is, can you imagine that you have standards developed in a voluntary way, but then you make the conformity assessment mandatory? That can be problematic. Yeah. So that when you mentioned this, that made me think of that, and that is something that members have raised in the committee vis-a-vis other members. I'm thinking of a very big neighbor you have. So China has sometimes been criticized that standardizing activities are done in China. They have a lot of effort on standardization, but then in a flip of the hand, those are made mandatory through technical regulations, and then members say, well, we didn't get a chance to, you never notified it because it was a standard. We didn't get a chance to comment on it. So just because of a glitch in the transparency, you have an increase in suspicion, which maybe you don't deserve because the standard could be completely legitimate. But there's this need to take the step of saying, well, now actually this is a regulation, should be notified, etc. So there is a kind of a conformity assessment back door one has to watch out for.
It's on the rise. It's on the rise. Conformity assessment notifications are on the rise.
Yeah, we will get to see some stats on that.
So I'm a little bit concerned because I think you're saying we should move on. Is that it? Okay. Because another 5 minutes?
Yeah, because it's 12:45.
Yeah, because there's a presentation on this issue now, right, in the program. So I think we raised this now because we have a discussion about this, but we can continue with this because there are more slides about the measure, and I will go through them. But I don't want to. If we have someone on the program who's going to speak, I don't want to interrupt them.
Hello. While exporting the plantation products to different countries, importing countries' technical regulations and standards, there is a conformity whenever we are negotiating with them. Always there is this issue of conformity assessment always comes up, especially in relation to lab results, laboratory results. Based on the nature, we are trying at the T-board, we are trying our level-based to get our enable accredited lab stage results to be accepted on mutually recognition principle basis. Till now, we have succeeded in respect of 1 or 2 countries, but in general we have failed. But still, the efforts are sustained. This laboratory aspect and the free trade negotiations, this conformity as how it has been dovetailed, is finally elaborated. When there are so many free trade agreements are coming up, which is actually distorting the WTO principles in a larger perspective.
I mean, I think you're making a really good observation on many levels, and we will go into that in more detail in the next few days. Maybe just to know that we will show specific statistics on the role of conformity assessment potentially becoming a trade barrier, and how it's rising, especially in the TBT committee, in terms of SDGs. And then we will also, when we speak about the committee and the role of the committee, we may also see the possibility of then using this tool of specific trade concerns to then address these potential issues that exporters face.
Yeah, I think this point is very important because it comes at the end of the food chain, so to speak, because you may have done everything right in terms of, you may be conforming with the standard, conforming with the regulation, have done a conformity assessment procedure, but then when you're going to export it, your partner says, no, but sorry, we don't recognize the lab results because your laboratory is not accredited or something like that. And then it falls apart because of the end of the chain. And what we're seeing in the committee is an increasing number of issues that relate to conformity assessment. And I think it's a sign of the times that we are also working on guidelines in the committee, and Anwar has been heavily involved in terms of how one should apply the guidelines of conformity assessment, because this is very, very difficult for many developing countries, because they may not have the same capacity to demonstrate conformity precisely because they don't have laboratories that sometimes are accredited. So accreditation becomes very important. And someone here was from the accreditation conformity assessment side could say more about this. But clearly there has the whole area of what we call quality infrastructure is growing in importance. That's not only accreditation, it's laboratories, it's metrology, it's the work of the standards body, everything taken together, which creates this infrastructure of confidence in your products. But if you don't have that in the market, it falls. And India should be proactive in raising these issues in the committee if you are not accessing your markets. It's the kind of thing that needs to be raised.
Ultimately, our basic objective is to establish market limits. To establish market limits. Sir, all said and done, our ultimate objective is to establish market linkage.
Yeah, market, yeah.
Linkage and hassle-free access to the markets.
Yes.
Though now all these things, regulations, technical regulations, standards, adoption of standards, that conformity assessment procedures, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, but without it, it will affect your competitiveness. If you do not have, what I'm trying to say is from the point of view of an exporting country, this type of infrastructure and the confidence that comes with it will be key in accessing markets. So if that is something that you will be able to use to show your competitiveness and trust in your products. Without it, that will be difficult. But then there's nothing in the TBT agreement that says you have to have it. That's the issue. That's why the world has moved on and there's much more discussion of these types of issues.
Sir, from the practical perspective, what you would like to say that when we are mounting delegations in every importing country, when we are trying to harmonize with their standards, harmonization, then these conformity assessment procedures and this harmonization about this conformity, before that they will import that particular product. That becomes very crucial. And now it's basically a difference between leap and the seed. Ultimately, we are unable to penetrate that market to the extent we are desirous.
Yeah, and if you are unable, what I'm saying is you need to bring this up at the WTO. This is part of what when I was talking about at the beginning in the speech. The opening, there are offensive interests you have and there are defensive interests. So on the offensive side, these are the types of issues that you always have the right of raising at the WTO and using the forum that is there. There's no other way to have something to say. I think we need to break here.
Because I got a brief presentation, yes, great. So we will continue with some of these issues, of course, after lunch. All right, thank you.
That was a very insightful session. So for the next